Welcome. My name is Beri Meric. I'm co-founder and CEO at IVY, and it's my pleasure to introduce all of you today to Rob Gardner. Rob, hello. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. I'm here in London, in a place called Richmond, outside of London. So yeah, all good.
Okay, so good to have you here today. I'm really excited for our conversation. To give everybody a little bit of context, we're here to discuss how we can all master our financial well-being. And it's really going to be an in-depth conversation with a lot of interaction from the audience on how we can all secure a better financial future for ourselves, our loved ones, and truly everybody that we care about. Our guide today, Rob, is truly an ideal person to learn from. He's one of the top 25 investment consultants globally. He's the director of investments at St. James Place Wealth Management. He's also the former co-CEO of the award-winning investment consultancy firm, Redington. And he's going to be sharing his essential insights from years of experience growing and protecting the wealth of over 700,000 clients with more than 100 billion in assets. So our conversation is going to have three parts. First, we're going to really learn about financial well-being and resilience, the way that Rob frames it. From there, we're going to learn from him key action items that we can take to really bolster our financial well-being. And then from there, we're going to dive into audience Q&A. So any questions you might have, whenever they come to you, please type them in the Q&A box. And I will, together with Rob, do our best to just go through all of those questions that we receive from you. So highly encourage everybody to ask as much as possible. Rob, welcome once again. And just to kick off, I want to ask you, how do you even define financial well-being and resilience from your perspective? And why, in your view, is it so important and more than just creating lots of wealth?
Yeah, let me start with financial resilience, which I think is the key bit. So most of us now are kind of used to this idea of resilience and mental resilience. And the truth is that financial resilience, whether for yourself individually or if you're an entrepreneur or a business, is absolutely key. And the truth is that people who aren't financially resilient, when things happen, when the bumps in the road happen, and here's the truth, there are always bumps in the road. So COVID-19 is particularly shocking and is a really big bump. But these are kind of, one of the things we need to normalize if we're all going to live to 100, that there will be bumps in the road, is how do you make sure that you have enough cash in your system to act as a shock absorber for when things go wrong? So look, forgive me, I don't have to use UK stats just because I'm not on top of the US stats, but I know the picture is very similar. But the proportion of adults in the UK who have £500 or more, and £500 is, deemed to be, enough to, let's say, your washing machine breaks down or your car breaks down. The proportion of adults who have that much cash on the sidelines in the case of emergency is extremely low. The proportion of adults in the UK who have 3 months worth of salary on the sidelines is extremely low. So one of the things that COVID-19 has done as we've gone into lockdown, and for those that don't have ongoing jobs, that lack of financial resilience has a massive impact. The challenge you have when you don't have financial resilience is it then impacts your own mental well-being. If you're in a relationship, it can impact your relationship with your partner. If you have kids, your kids can pick up when you have money issues. So family, relationships, money is everywhere. We just don't talk about it. It's very taboo. And you'll be surprised how many people who are on the outside look like they're pretty well off, look like they've got lots of cash, are actually very low levels of financial resilience. To me, financial well-being is like well-being when it comes to health. It's this kind of, I'm guessing, a slightly dourest perspective that everything in moderation, including moderation. So I'm not suggesting we all live like Victorians, that, we never buy things and we never enjoy things. But actually, it's about having enough. It's about having enough for today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. And most of us, the truth be known, live for today. And we don't really think about tomorrow. And I'll define tomorrow as any of your kind of cash needs for next year and the next 5 years. And the day after tomorrow is thinking about retirement. I mean, in the US, it's frightening how few Americans Actually, I think there's like 15% of Americans aged 60 or more have $0 for retirement, $0. And here's the amazing thing. The average man in the UK or the US will run out of money 10 years before he dies. And the average woman will run out of money 12 and a half years before she dies. And that's because women tend to live longer than men. Women, because of the income inequality gap, earn less than men. Because they take time out for maternity leave, they then tend to save less than men. And when they invest their money, they tend to take less risk than men. And that compounds and actually creates an even greater sort of inequality gap when people come to retirement.
Excellent, Rob. Thank you so much. So in summary, financial resilience is all about being able to absorb unexpected shocks. And financial well-being is all about being good today, tomorrow, but also for like the latter part of our lives, which are also being extended thanks to medical technologies, but that doesn't necessarily prepare us financially for what that means. So before we dive into like specific best practices that you've identified, I want to ask you, share with us what you found to be the biggest myths about, you know, financial well-being in your experience. So even from, let's say, very experienced business people, even from people who might have, you know, quite a bit of wealth, what are the recurring themes, like the constant mistakes that you see people making, both in terms of their perception, but also in terms of their allocation of resources?
So here's the thing. So what you didn't mention is I sit on the World Economic Forum Retirement Council. So I help advise the World Economic Forum globally on how do we make sure that everyone on the planet has enough money in retirement. But actually, I've written a children's book called Save Your Acorns. I've created this card game called Silly Monkeys. And I set up a charity where we go into school and teach kids 3 things. The reason I tell you that is the stuff that we teach the 5-year-old, 7-year-old kids, Girl Scouts, 10-year-olds, is exactly the same as I would be telling you, Beri. And what I do is I go into school and I say, I'm going to teach you 3 things. I'm going to teach you how to earn it, how to keep it, and how to grow it. And if you do those 3 things, earn it, keep it, grow it, you will have financial resilience and you will have financial well-being. Now, obviously, like all of these things, you can unpack it a level 2, a level 3, a level 4, depending on who the audience is. But actually, all of it can be distilled back to those 3 things. And even, you know, people like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, the wealthiest people, the truly wealthiest people on the planet, Bill Gates, all know and understand this.
Excellent, Rob. So let's dive into it. If you like, we can follow the kind of structure that you've provided. So when you talk about earning it, so beyond maximizing salary and, you know, investing properly, like how do you approach this? What are the best practices to make sure that we're as financially, like our financial wellness is as maximized as possible?
Well, look, so a couple of things. Let me kind of maybe share how I came up with these concepts. So my background is my mum and dad were both teachers. I was born in Holland. We lived all over the world. I lived in Argentina for a while. And living in Argentina in the 1980s, it was experiencing inflation, not quite as bad as Venezuela today, but pretty bad. To put it in context, we moved there in about 1985. We left in 1989. And my dad's 1 month salary in 1985 wouldn't buy you 1 postage stamp in 1989. So inflation was running at about 30% a month. And at the end of each month, my mum and dad would collect us from school and we go shopping. We go to the supermarket. And in the UK, we have this TV show called Supermarket Sweep, where you kind of run around the supermarket and you have to grab everything and put it in. And we literally do the same. Because what happened was the prices would change every day and someone would go around with a price gun and change the item. So if you could get the item at the morning price and check out, that's the price you paid before it went up. So you can imagine being 7 years old every month, going to the supermarket, running around and just trying to grab this stuff. Then we go and get haircuts, new clothes, new shoes, all the stuff that you do. And then that night we drive up to a house. Imagine the meanest looking house from Narcos. So take a house from Narcos, and that's the house in Buenos Aires that we used to drive up to. Dobermans, metal bars. My dad would get out of his Ford Taurus and we walk up, and the Doberman was like this, in your face. I was 7 in the back, and my dad would take all their money in cash and exchange it illegally into dollars. Then we drive home and take those US dollars, we take a brick out the wall, and they'd hide the money in the house. That's because it was safer to take your money and convert it to dollars and hide it in the house than put it in the bank. And I'm 7 years old. And when I moved back to the UK, I thought this was normal. Yeah, inflation, 30%, you know, put it in the wall. So there's that story. Let me tell you another story, and I'll tell you about how that ties into the earn it and keep it. So in Argentina, my parents were teaching at this school called St. Andrew's Scott School in Buenos Aires, which is a really good school for predominantly expats or very wealthy Argentinians. And if any of you know Argentina, it's got a very steep Gini coefficient, which means a very small proportion of ultra wealthy people and then a very long proportion of ultra poor people. And we were this kind of like weird middle class that were there. And we had no money. And I would come home from school with money. And my mum and dad would be like, Rob, where did you get that money from? And what would happen is at lunchtime, I'd see the older kids in the playground and they'd be drinking their Coca-Cola and their Fanta. And then I'd go and collect them all. And then I'd go and hide them in the corner of the playground. And then at the end of school, I'd go and then take them to the shop and get, you know, like the equivalent of 5 cents or 10 cents back. And I'd come home with money. The reason I tell you that story is that there are opportunities to earn money everywhere. And when I speak to students in the UK, there are 2 types of students. They're the students who go to university and spend all their money on Deliveroo, or they're the other students who go and work for Deliveroo and Uber and study and earn their money. It's a choice. And I set a challenge to young people. I say, why don't you go to your mum and dad, your neighbors, your grandparents, and offer to clear out their attic or their garage for free, and then try and sell that stuff on eBay and raise as much money as possible. So it's trying to develop this kind of entrepreneur's mindset, which is there's opportunities to earn money everywhere. There'll be people on this call who know this. There'll be people who hustle muscle, who couldn't afford to get into uni and had to make it work. You know, their parents couldn't afford to send that, and somehow by hook or by crook, working in bars, like doing whatever, you get hold of the money. But earning the money, it's not good enough. You've got to keep hold of it. And for me, that story about inflation taught me a lot. And then when I was 17, I was desperate to get a car. And so what I did is I figured out how much it would cost me to buy a car, and I got a job. I had a job, paper round. So kids in the UK, you know, paper round, yeah, you do it in the US as well. And I got a job in the local sports store. And I worked out the number of days I had to work to buy this car. Except there's this thing called tax. And I remember getting my first paper slip, and then I figured out how much I'd done. And then suddenly this thing called the government, HMRC, had deducted all of this money. And I'm like, ah. So I then had to recalculate how long it would take to buy my car. The other mistake I made was that when you're 17, it actually costs more money to insure yourself for 1 year than the car I was buying. I mean, I was buying a badass Ford Fiesta 957cc car. It was whitening light, double red stripe. Yeah, it was awesome. But the cost of that car was less than 1 year's insurance for a 17-year-old. Anyway, there was this ad on the radio. I called around, and I just locked myself into this amazing insurance deal. I was like, yeah, I've nailed it. Anyway, about 6 weeks later, I get a letter from the Financial Ombudsman, and I've never heard of the Financial Ombudsman. It says, "Dear Mr. Gardner, we regret to inform you that your insurance company that you bought insurance from is basically a fraud. It was backed by this Nigerian insurance company, and basically you have no insurance and it's all gone." And I'm like, oh my God, what has happened? By the way, this was a insurance company that was advertising on local radio in Bristol. So it was, you know, legitimate paid for adverts on the radio. And that taught me another key lesson, which is, again, keeping hold of your money and be careful of scams. The amount of people who get scammed out of their money on either stuff that's too good to be true, my car insurance, which was half the cost of anyone else, or some person, Beri, I'm going to double your money in the next 3 months. I've got this amazing investment. I know some people, I'll sort you out, I'll cut you in. Like, people fall for this stuff all the time. So there I was, earn it, keep it. My mum and dad were both teachers, hard workers. My mum saved 100% of what she earned, but they were terrible at the third thing, which is grow it. And one of the things I teach kids is that Albert Einstein talks about inflation being the eighth wonder of the world. And he said this: he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. And here's the frightening thing: the differential of wealth and well-being between people who understand that very simple point is enormous. And so I like to share the story of a good friend of mine who I now work with. When she was 18, she got a job working as an administrator in a university. She was sat next to her friend who was also 18, and she would go into town. She'd go into, Oxford Street, which is the main shopping street in London, walk into a shop, and they'd give her a store card, and she'd get new dresses, new handbags. She's like, this is great, bam, and all the rest. A few years went by, she had everything. Her friend, they used to go out together. She didn't have new dresses and new handbags, was saving. And about 7 years later, bought her first house. Anyway, when I met her, unfortunately, she had like 10, 15 grand's worth of credit card debt at about 25%. It was just strangling her. By the way, she only spent 7 or 8 grand on dresses. That's what interest does. That's what compound interest does. It means that you end up paying double what you do. The reason I tell you that is her friend is the same age, earning the same salary, and there she was with 15 grand's worth of credit card debt and no assets to her name. And her friend had a house, because the definition of wealth is all of the assets that you accumulate at a point in time minus all your liabilities. So do you have a home? What physical assets do you own? What investments, bank accounts? What pension assets do you have? And then minus all your liabilities. Do you have a mortgage? Is your car on a lease, or do you own it outright? Do you have credit card debts? And that kind of gives you a mark to market of your wealth. And the really interesting thing is, in the UK, we have this government entity called the Office of National Statistics. I'm sure there's the same in the US. And they create every year what's called a wealth asset study, and they break it down by income decile. So they take all the people who earn 30 to 40 grand, all the people who earn 40 to 50 grand, and so forth. And guess what? There is no correlation between wealth and income. In every income group, you end up with a massive distribution. And the reason why is that the difference between those who live beyond their means and end up in debt, and those that live within their means and then can take their money and compound it, is the real differentiator. And the ability to grow your money, which is easier said than done, because you can't put it in the bank account because you get 0% interest rates. That's the hard bit. So actually it's really easy to do, but like everything in life, the self-discipline needed to do it is the hardest part.
Excellent, Rob. Really, really appreciate you sharing those personal stories, right? How you're going from, putting money in the walls. I grew up in Turkey, so I had the high inflation kind of childhood as well, and how that shaped actually your path to now, managing money for some of the, most respected institutions in the world. So I want to ask you, these key lessons apply to absolutely everyone. The one that really strikes me is definitely the one between like zero correlation between income and wealth. So when you speak to these, let's say very advanced level people who, they're running organizations, they have a ton of responsibilities, what are the best practices that you share with them specifically? So based on this kind of like paradigm that you shared with us, what are some very specific next steps that our audience can take, starting tomorrow, starting next week, to start doing better across all 3 of these areas?
Look, I think that, rule 1 is, so I've been trying to figure out, like, here's the thing: budgeting, saving money is incredibly hard, right? And there was a study done in the UK of what 30 things do you wish you'd learnt at school but no one ever taught you at school. Number 1 was how to budget. In fact, 4 of the top 5 were to do with finance, how insurance works, my pension. One of them was how to change a plug, how to change the power socket. The rest were to do with finance. And number 1 was how to budget. And we don't get taught how to budget. And this is to me, this is the differential, the ability to live within your means or not. And so I've been thinking, okay, what analogy really works? And then so every day pre-lockdown, I would travel into London on the train, on the tube, and I'd watch people. And what's the one thing people never run out of? It's the juice on their phone. So it's like, what if I could start equating financial well-being to the battery on your phone? If like me, I used to get like battery anxiety. You go in, you're listening to your AirPods, you're listening to your music, you're checking your WhatsApp, checking your emails, you're on your Microsoft Teams, you're doing all of that stuff. You come in, you're working, and then you're commuting home, and then suddenly your phone goes low power mode, and you're like, oh, okay, I've got to get home. I don't want to run out of juice before I get home, just in case I need to call my wife and my kids. So I turn off the music. You know, we know what to do, right? We know which apps use the most power, and we just kind of chain it down. And actually, the iPhone helpfully tells you, you now need to go into low power mode. And your number one goal is not to run out of juice. And then as soon as you get in someone's house, you're like, hey, Beri, have you got a charger? Because my phone's just about, like, hey, Beri, great to see you, but do you have a charger? It's like, you know, it's everywhere. And so it's like, actually, what if everyone thought about their money in the same way? Then we'd have financial resilience. So you'd be amazed how many, I mean, I was doing a webinar the other day with a global brand agency. You would know them. And there was a very senior exec on there. And he sent me a LinkedIn message afterwards. This guy was in his late 40s, early 50s. And he'd fallen into the trap where he was earning a lot of money. He had the Range Rover, he had the nice apartment, he had the nice stuff, but he had no pension set aside. He had no game plan for the day after tomorrow. So when I said, what's your plan for the day after tomorrow? He's like, I don't have a plan. I'm just going to keep working forever. I'm like, well, dude, that's not a plan. So my point is have you got financial resilience? And you'd be amazed how many people, you know, I used to work in banking. I used to work at Deutsche Bank and Merrill Lynch. People who earn like hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, they spend all of it. They'd spend next year's bonus before they'd even earned it. So this is just like a habitual thing. And so my number one tip is, do you live within your financial means? If you were to look at your financial well-being as an iPhone battery, is it nice and green, 80 to 100% charged? Do you basically just live on low power mode at 20%? Or worse, are you low? And your job, number one job, is to get that financial resilience up. Once you've got your financial resilience up, you can now start charging your second battery, which is your day after tomorrow battery.
Excellent. Before we dive there, Rob, let's talk a little bit more about this rule number one, budgeting. So give us a couple of rules of thumb that can help us as like as a guide here. So what have you found to be like easy to kind of develop habits when it comes to budgeting? Like, is it a proportion of income? But also like qualitatively, what's a good way to save so that you don't need to overthink it and it happens automatically? Some like tips and tricks that we can all apply right away.
So let me give you two rules of thumbs on like how much, and then also habits, because guess what? I think there was a study done in Denmark and they analyzed the whole of like the population of Denmark. I think only 10 to 15% of people are natural savers. The rest of us, we naturally just want to go out and have a good time and spend money. So know thyself, know that behaviorally you do this. So I'm going to tell you the story about Ulysses and how you need to hack yourself behaviorally. But when I start with how much, so there's actually huge amounts of wisdom going back years and years. So, you know, one of the things in the Bible that thinks is you should save basically 30%, 10% to pay off your debt, 10% for tithing, which is charity, and 10% for yourself. I don't know if you know the story of Joseph, but if you remember, Joseph gets thrown into prison because his brothers have basically done a job on him. And then the Pharaoh's having these nightmares, and he's having these nightmares, and there are these sheaves of corn, and they're dying, and there are these fat pigs, and then they're dying. And he goes to all of his wise counsel, and they're like, what do these dreams mean? And they go, we don't know, but there's this crazy guy we basically got in prison. He's called Joseph. Why don't you get him up? So Joseph comes up and he says, look, Beri, it's really simple, Pharaoh. What it says is you're going to have 7 really good years. It's going to be bountiful crops. The Nile will be flowing. The cows will be good. And then you're going to have 7 years of famine. There'll be no crops and there'll be no cows. Pharaoh says, oh, wow, thank you for telling me. He said, what shall I do? He says, it's really easy. He doesn't say 20%. I think it's 1 in 5, but I can't remember the exact quote from the lot, but it's basically 20%. He basically says, in the good times, take 20% and put it aside and you'll be okay. So Pharaoh then takes Joseph and he basically makes him, you know, in charge of treasury. He makes him there's the head of the Fed for all of Egypt in biblical times. And guess what? The good times come, they collect 20%, they store it all away. The famine comes and they're all okay. These are the bumps in the road that I'm talking about. We've had bumps in the road for thousands of years. Doesn't matter where you've lived, for thousands of years, we've had the 4 seasons. It doesn't matter. These things come and go. And the very simple truth is, in the good times, you save a little bit and put it aside for the bad times. Again, in other biblical text, not biblical, but in like Buddhist texts and all the rest, it's somewhere between 10 and 30%. Now, the average person says, what I'll do is I'll save the amount of money I have at the end of the month. And it never works, because actually the average person has no money at the end of the month. And so what you need to do is, there's this book called The Richest Man in Babylon, is pay thyself first. So I direct debit everything. The moment I get paid, my mortgage gets paid, I pay my money into my pension, I pay my money into my ISAs. I basically pay out 30% into my either paying off my mortgage or my day after tomorrow fund. And then I live off the 70%, and you learn to live off the 70%. And that's the hack. So there's this story of Ulysses. So if you know some of the kind of Greek stories, so there were these sirens, and these sirens were beautiful, and they had amazing voices, and they'd sing to you. And what would happen is sailors would sail past, and they'd hear the sirens, and they'd sail closer to see them, and then suddenly, smash, the ship would just get rocked on the rocks, and everyone would die. It's kind of what would happen. That's what the sirens did, right? And so Ulysses was like, okay, what can I do about this? So he had a really cunning plan. So he got his sailors, he'd go, you know what, we'll row past, and I'll put beeswax in their ears, and I'll bind them up, and I'll cover their eyes, and they'll row, so they won't be able to see them, they won't be able to hear them. And I'll get one of my sailors to tie my arms behind my behind me. I'm sure you all know the story of Ulysses. And of course, they row past, he sees the sirens, he gets to hear them sing, they're the most beautiful voice he's ever heard, he gets to see them, they're the most beautiful sirens on the planet, and he sails past and the ship's all okay. So when it comes to investing, and this is the bit when we get on to growing your money, is that the stock market is designed to shake off the weak. The reason why people think property is a great investment is it's the only asset we buy and hold for 30 years. And actually, this is what Warren Buffett knows. This is what Charlie Munger knows. This is what I go around teaching kids. In fact, if you just knew this one simple thing, wealth would be sorted. So in the UK, I go to schools and I say, did you know that if you start a pension from birth and you put £5 a day until the age of 10 and stop, it will be worth over £1 million by the time you retire. And that is the power of compound interest, because in the UK, you get an incentive for saving for your pension. The government will give you £1 for free for every £5. Sorry, more actually, it'll give you 25%. So for every £4 you invest, it will give you £1. So £5 a day is about £1,800 a year. By the way, that's like one Starbucks, right? I'm not talking about a lot here. It's one Starbucks, it's one sandwich. It's basically not very much. The government then gives you free money. So at the end of 1 year, you've saved £1,800. The government's given you 450 quid. Do that over 10 years, that's £18,000 and £4.5 grand. So you've now got £22,500. If you invest in the stock market, over a rolling 10-year period, returns have been well north of 7%. Now, if you know the rule of 71, the rule of 71 says, I take my rate of interest and I divide that into 71, and that's how long it takes to double my money. So I double my money every 10 years. And so that money is now worth 35 grand, and I now leave it. By the time they're 20, 35 grand has become 70. By the time they're 30, 70 has become 140. By the time they're 40, 280, 560, a million. Bam. That's the magic of compound interest. And look, this plays out in the US. This is one of the big issues that's playing out, around, let's say, Black Lives Matters and all the rest, is that the compounding of wealth for members of the Black community is way smaller. There is no intergenerational wealth transfer versus for the Americans. And we see this kind of wealth inequality played out because there's not this long-term compounding of wealth. And it's why we end up with this myth that property is the best. Certainly in the UK, I know in the US, the dynamics of property are a bit different. But property is this brilliant asset to invest in. The only reason it's a brilliant asset is because we buy it and we own it for 30 to 40 years.
Excellent, Rob. So on the one hand, critical, where the moment we get paid, we essentially allocate, you're recommending around about 20%, 10 to 30%, but let's say 20 to 30%, just pay off what you need to, put it into your savings and retirement accounts, and just like live off the 70%. And then once you do that,
wait. Your battery needs to be full. If you're in debt and you've got credit card debt, so like my friend, then your number one job is to pay off those credit card debts. So you cannot do any of that until you've got your emergency funds. So 1 month, 3 months in cash, safe.
Okay, so let's make that more clear. So you think you should have at least 3 months of savings, like even if you had no income, and then everything, that first 20, 30% should always be going towards paying debts before you start accumulating.
Yeah. So if you've got kind of credit card, store card debts and all the rest, and you're paying 20, 30%, then your number one job is to take out another loan, take out that debt at a lower rate of interest and pay it off as quickly as possible and build up. So try and think of, you've got these two batteries. You've got your current phone, your iPhone battery, make sure that's charged. And then you've got this other battery, which is your day after tomorrow battery. And that's the bit that you want to be putting your kind of 30% in. Obviously, it depends if you have a mortgage. Remember that a house is an asset. So if you've got a mortgage against it, that's very different to a pair of sneakers that you bought on credit card and paying on debt. So what do you own, an asset, or is it just like something cool that will be worth nothing in 5 years' time?
And just, so let's say, all right, so we get our income, we make sure to pay off any debts and so forth that are going to compound if we don't pay them off. And then, basically do our best to live off the 70%. The amount that we do get to keep once the debts are paid off, you're suggesting like putting it into something that you're going to buy and hold. And you mentioned this, like the stock market compounding at 7% over the long run. Would your suggestion be, like, as general investment kind of, keeping it simple, is that if you do go with the stock market, buy like an index that's going to give you like an even exposure and just hold it no matter what's going up and down for as long as possible? Is that the key? Or would you actually also suggest that, like, okay, maybe only have some of it in stock market, some of it in, certificates of deposit and so forth? How do you think about the amount that you're holding on to and where you put it?
So you've got to remember that the day after tomorrow stuff is for a long time off. And so this is for stuff, actually a really important thing is, do you know your life expectancy? So again, in the US, you can log on to the Office of National Statistics and my life expectancy is predicted to be 86. I'm 41 now. I've got a 1 in 10 chance of living to 100. Children born today have a life expectancy of over 100. So my 2 daughters have a life expectancy of living to 100. It turns out that we underestimate our own life expectancy by about 20%. So we anchor when our parents or grandparents died and think, hey, well, they died in their 70s, so I'll die in my 70s. So we massively underestimate our own life expectancy. The so what of that is, if I'm saving for my pension, I'm not going to be touching that for 25 years. Now, when you invest in the stock market, I don't know if when you go to the gym and you do the ropes like that, investing in the stock market is like the ropes. So at the end, you're doing it, it's like that. It's horrible. It's like a roller coaster. Stock market up 40%, down 40%. It's just horrific. And then the ropes, as it gets closer and closer to there, it gets smoother and smoother. So if you take long run rolling returns for equity, so annually, it's between, minus 40, 50%. I think in 2008, US stock market fell 48, 49%, and like north of 40%. Rolling 5-year basis, it does that. By the time you get to rolling 10-year basis, it's nearly always positive. By the time you get a rolling 15-year basis, even taking into account the 1929 stock market crash, all of your returns from holding equities are above zero. And actually, the median expected return has been north of 7%. And look, here's the thing: Warren Buffett says, look, if you don't know what you're doing, just put 10% in cash and then put 90% in, S&P 500. Now, I would probably say buy MSCI World, which is, all the stocks in the world. So S&P 500 is just US stocks. But the reality is, S&P 500 makes up over 50% of global equity. So one of the challenges we have in the UK is people overinvest in the UK market, and the UK market is only 8% of global market cap. So I would say to any person, it's slightly different in the US, but I would say to anyone anywhere in the world, if you don't know what you're doing, and you're investing for the long term, and let's define long term 15 years or more, day after tomorrow money, then you can put 100% of that into the stock markets. Now, like in everything in life, that's the 90-10 rule. If you want to get smarter, there's stuff you can do. And obviously, the more money you earn, your tax gets more complicated and all the rest. But you'd be amazed how few people actually just get the basics right. So this is just the kind of, when we spoke, you just said, like, what's the 101, the really stripped down stuff? This is the stripped down basics.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, so far, basically for everybody who's listening to this, if you're not saving 20 to 30, if you haven't paid off if you're not focused on paying off the debts, if you're not able to save 20 to 30%, and then of that 20 to 30% that you're saving, if it's not going through something that's going to compound in a relatively predictable way over 15 plus years, then you've given us a lot of a lot of key points already just to get those done as table stakes. What else have you seen as best practices, Rob? Any additional things that you've seen people who've just managed, to buy those homes when others who are maybe even getting paid millions still not saving anything for later life?
Well, look, the key thing is actually there's a massive differential between those who have a plan and don't have a plan. So Morningstar did some research in 2015, and they just found that the difference between people who had some kind of financial plan and those that didn't, their wealth was 15% more. So if you were on track to get $1 million and I have a plan, I'll end up with $1.15 million. And it's not because I get a better investment performance. It's probably because I save a bit more, I'm a bit more disciplined, and I'm a bit more on it. I think that the reality is, I mean, again, research was done by Scottish Widows, which is like a big insurance provider in the UK. I think in the UK, the average person spends more time making one cup of tea than they do thinking about their pension. So think about it. You want to retire at 65, you're going to live to 86, you're going to live to 90, and you're only going to spend less than 2 minutes a year thinking about your pension. Does that make any sense whatsoever? And I can't believe the stats are any different for the US.
Right. So have a plan. Have a plan. Okay.
Have a plan. Look, one of the questions in the chat was about doubling your money. You're right. You can't put your money in the bank. Now, here's the amazing thing. There was some research done in the US. This is about 2 years ago, where they asked a whole load of adults, what do you think's happened to the US stock market since 2008? So 2008 to 2018. By the way, from 2009 to 2018, the S&P 500 basically grew in a straight line, 12% a year. That's doubling your money every 6 years. Insane. Now, what happened is 40% of Americans thought that the level of S&P 500 was the same in 2018 as it was in 2008. There's data that tracks retail platforms. So there are platforms where you can go on in the US, we have them in the UK called Hargreaves Lansdown, and you want to just open a 401k or a 589k, and you log on and you do your stuff. And pre-2008, people were saving money every month, every year, and net money in. And what this does is it tracks net money in versus net money out. This is the sirens I was talking about. What do you think? So 2000 all the way up to 2008, money going in. What do you think happened in 2009? Yeah, people pulled that. Not only did people stop putting their money in, they pulled their money out of equities and into cash. They panicked. The sirens came and they said, "Oh my God, we're all going to die. It's 2008. The world is over." Same way, Pharaoh, same thing. 7 years. This cycle has been going for thousands and thousands of years. Same thing's happening with COVID-19 right now. We're all going to die. We're never going to come out of this. The economy will never recover. It's game over. Like, this is what happens. It took 5 years, so 2008 to 2013, before those inflows turned positive again. So the average retail investor in America missed out on 5 years worth of compounding at 12%. So if you put your money in, if you'd had $10,000, you basically missed out on about $7,000 worth of compound growth. So the differential between wealth is really between those that are in debt and paying their debt. They're the worst off. those who aren't in debt, but basically have all their money in cash and are being destroyed by inflation, and those who participate in the market. So my sister lives in Texas, and in 2009, my niece was born. And, you know, in the UK, you can kind of afford to send your kids to college. In the US, it's insanely expensive, right? So I was like, well, what can I do? And what I didn't want to do was just buy her all the Disney toys and all the rest. And I thought, you know what I'd do? I'm going to set her up a 589K college fund. So it's an incentivized tax scheme to help you go for college. And I actually put in £1 a day, but let's call it $1 a day just to keep it easy. So I put $1 a day, I put it into a Vanguard fund that tracks the S&P 500. And it goes in, it's basically $30 a month goes in every month. And this has been happening since January 2009. So at the 7% example, $1 a day, that's $365. So over 10 years, that's $3,650. At about a 7% return over that period, I think it becomes about $5,500. That $5,500 will double again in 10 years' time, and I'll put in another 3,600, which will become 5,500. So that will become $16,000 over 18 years. And all I've paid in is $7,000. And now every year, well, for the first 10 years, she basically thought her uncle was an arsehole because he didn't buy her any presents. And now I print off her certificate and I say, boom, you earn $500 of Amazon stock. Boom, you earn $400 of Apple stock. Boom, you earn this much MasterCard. You earn this much JP Morgan. And she's like, wow. And I'm like, Uncle Rob's going to put you through college. And my sister's like, whoa, like, how come no one teaches this stuff? So look, the reality is the Girl Scouts USA has a brilliant financial education program to teach kids about this stuff, because it's such a core base skill. Actually, that's the most important stuff, is go and do stuff like this, read books, like listen to podcasts, teach yourself about this stuff. This is that, like, financial education, financial literacy is one of the key determinants between people who make good or bad decisions about money.
That was excellent. And I love that. I think we'll all remember the example of Uncle Rob, right? If we can be that good influence on others, especially in addition to doing all these things. So Rob, this has been excellent. I'm going to dive into the audience Q&A. Anybody listening live, if you have additional questions, please try to ask them in the next couple minutes, and we'll try to get through all of them. So Jeffrey Levine asks and says, I've used a few personal financial programs and find they're all pretty lacking. Right now, I'm using Ace Money. Are there any you recommend?
So look, I don't know any programs in the US. One of the reasons I set up a charity called Red Start is to teach sort of financial education. I'm actually writing a book called Prosperity to try and put this into place. But look, if you haven't read Richest Man in Babylon, it was a book written over 100 years ago. That is like the key book to read. Obviously, there's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's Mastering the Game by Tony Robbins. He's got another book out, Smarter Money. Look, there's a ton of good books out there. There's lots of podcasts. I've done lots of podcasts similar to this show that you can download. Actually, when you realize it is as simple as earn it, keep it, grow it. And actually, the hardest part is the self-discipline. And look, I'm not a natural spender, which is why I kind of force myself to pay off my mortgage, to save into my ISAs, which is kind of like tax-free investments, and to make sure I maximize my pension. Look, here's another story. So a friend of mine sent me a message on Instagram the other day, and she said, I did a TEDx talk, actually. You can download my TEDx talk. And she said, oh, Rob, I came to watch your TEDx. I thought you'd be really interested in this. So she's 32. She's just come back on maternity leave. And she said, look, because of COVID-19, I've not been commuting into work. And so I basically take the £150 a month that I would have spent on commuting in, and I've topped up my pension. Now, she works for a company where they match her pension. So a lot of companies in the UK, if you save $200, says, Beri will match your $200. And by the way, the government will probably give you some extra bucks on top to do that. And I said to her, I said, Liz, so you're putting £150 a month that you were spending on commuting to work. You're now working from home. I said, do you know how much that will be worth when you're 65? Or do you know how much income you'll have when you retire? Do you want to guess, Beri?
Go ahead, tell us.
It'll be about £17,000 a year in retirement, which is about 650, 700,000 pounds. So that decision to save £150 a month will mean that she'll be 700,000 pounds better off by the time she's 65. Wow. That's the magic of compound interest, regular saving, company matching, and tax relief. By the way, if your company offers you matching on your pension, does anyone on this call turn down a pay rise? If I came to you and said, I'll give you 10% pay rise, would you turn me down?
Nope.
So how many companies in the US offer their staff a matching scheme that says, Beri, I will match your day after tomorrow contributions. So if you put in an extra 10%, if you put in an extra $200, I'll give you $200 on top. That's a free $200 a month pay rise. And the average employee in the UK and the average employee in the US turns that stuff down because they feel like they're losing money because they're counting it in their now money. I'm losing $200 in my today money, but they forget the mental accounting that their day after tomorrow money is $200, plus they're getting a free $200, so it's $400, plus the government is giving you free tax, and it's going to compound away for the next 25 or 30 years.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rob. We've got a question here on what do you advise for those with less than 15 years before they need to begin taking out their money in retirement? And just to taking the same question, but going a bit bigger, what would you advise to those that feel like, has the ship sailed? I'm already 35, 45, 55, whatever the age might be. So what do you say to those who need to get their money out sooner than 15 years? And then for those who feel like they're too late to start?
Look, so there's a great quote that says that, the best time to start saving for your future was 20 years ago. The second day is today. So it's never too late. In the UK, we've got this guy called Captain Tom. I don't know if you read about Captain Tom, but he's this guy who was in World War II, and he raised lots of money for the NHS. But crucially, he just celebrated his 100th birthday. So if you're going to retire at 65 and you live for 100, that's 35 years that you've got to fund yourself on. That's a long period of time. The rule of thumb used to be take 100, take off your age. So if you're 40, and then basically 60% should be in equities and 40% in bonds. I think now, because we're living longer and all the rest, I would start with 120. So if you're in your 50s, you should probably still have 70% in equities. The reality is your company pension fund or your provider, Fidelity or Vanguard, will have some kind of online calculator. All these firms, Vanguard, Fidelity, all have these online calculators where you can go out and work out, rule of thumb, how much you should have. The point being is if you're 50s, you've still got another 15 years until you retire. And if you put it all in bonds when you retire, you're not going to be able to keep pace with inflation.
Rob, could you just repeat the kind of rule of thumb you mentioned now that we're going to live longer? I know there's calculators out there, but just so we have it crystallized here.
The old rule of thumb is like, how much should I have in equities, risky, and how much should I have in bonds, less risky, would be to take 100, subtract your age. So if I'm 40, effectively, then I'd have 60% in equities and 40% in bonds. I would now shift that and take 120. So 120 minus 40 is 80. So I have about 80% in equities.
Okay, excellent.
So if you were 50, you still end up with 70% in equities, or if you're 55, 65% in equities.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We've got a question from Ak who asks, what are your thoughts on inflation outlook, especially in response to the recent monetary policy response during the pandemic? Does that affect your view on the various asset classes and debt, such as mortgage?
So look, the $1 million question, and this is kind of, look, my whole thesis is predicated on you can't predict the future. So I'm not trying to say, well, this will be the same or different to 2008 or 2009. What if you take away from it is that if for thousands of years we've had the seasons, we've had floods, day follows night, and all the rest, we have these economic cycles. And everyone's talking about, what are we going to have, a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery? And the reality is we don't know. But what I do know is that putting all your money in cash ain't going to save you in the long term, because inflation will erode you. Look, my personal view on how governments will get out of this is they will form what's called they will follow a policy which is called financial repression, which is really what happened post 2008. And what happens is you issue a load of bonds, you create quantitative easing, you try and get people to invest in the stock market and buy properties and go and consume stuff, and you try and get the economy to grow. So if I issue $1 trillion worth of debt, I'll then try and let inflation run at 2 or 3%, and then I'll basically offer 0 interest rates or negative interest rates, and you create what's called a negative real yield. And that basically means that the $1 trillion of debt I have to pay off in 10 years' time or 20 years' time or 30 years' time starts to increase that. So that's called financial repression. And that's my personal view on how the Bank of England, the Fed, the Bundesbank will try and get out of that. And therefore that will cause inflation. And that will mean that if you just have all your money in equities, or if you have all your money in low yielding bonds, then your assets will be eroded.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rob. Here's a great question from Chris Wisdo, who asks, how do we as a society address the problem in the broader population, i.e. solving the problem that most people don't talk about money and aren't looking for webinars, podcasts, and so forth to educate themselves?
So look, there's this thing called the FinLit test, which asks 3 questions. Question 1 is you have $100, interest rates are 2% for 1 year. How much money do you have after 1 year? 102, 100, 98? I don't know. Second question, I put my money, and inflation is running at 3%. I put my money in the bank for 2 years. In 2 years' time, can I buy more with my money? The same, less, don't know. 3, I want to invest for my future. Do I put all my money in a single stock, or do I put my money in a basket of stocks, a mutual fund? Single stock, mutual fund, don't know. 1/3 of people globally say, I don't know to all 3 questions. Less than 1/3 of adults can get all 3 questions right. That is the level of financial literacy in the UK. The reality is we do not teach financial education. So I've been trying to get financial education on the school syllabus here in the UK. In 2014, it was put in the secondary school syllabus. But really, our money-saving habits are formed by the age of 7, which is why I wrote a children's book and created all of these things. In the US, there is a direct correlation state by state between the states that offer financial education and those that don't, and the level of indebtedness, the savings rate, and all the rest. There's a direct correlation between the kids who go on to university and 589K schemes that are linked to financial education. The reason I sit on the World Economic Forum is one of the 5 global policies, it doesn't matter if you're in Argentina, Angola, Australia, Austria, is to teach our kids about money. So if you have young kids, talk to them about money. And here's the frightening stat. It's only a stat in the UK, but I'm sure it's true in the US. Parents would rather talk to their kids about sex than about money. So money is a taboo subject that we just do not talk in. So it just precipitates and compounds this lack of financial literacy.
Thank you so much, Rob. Very well said. I have a question for you as an entrepreneur, but for anyone who, you know, has opportunities in front of them where they feel like, I believe in this thing, I'm going all in, right? What would be your suggestion in those situations? This could be around the stock, it could be someone doing something. And how do you deal with, you know, high risk, high return type situations in the context of everything that you mentioned? What is a best practice other than telling people to be just more reasonable and do things in moderation? Like, what's your kind of a bigger view on that kind of decision?
So what I talked about was investing. That's not the same as speculating. Yeah, I mean, you know the stories about Robin Hood and the kid who was like doing stuff on credit cards and committed suicide in China. The proportion of people who are speculating, you know, they think, hey, look, I bought Tesla stock, I made lots of money, I must be a genius. That is not a plan. That is not investing. So get the basics right. If at the other end, my dad likes to dabble. And I'm like, Dad, don't dabble with your pension. So I've taken a proportion of his money and dabble with it. It's a bit like, I like to play poker. I like to go to a casino, but I start with the premise, I'm going to take out $200 and I start with the assumption I'm going to come home with 0. I don't start with the assumption I want to come home with more, because that's the cost of a night out. So set yourself up. I have a dabble fund where if all of that stuff writes down to 0, it doesn't impact my financial security, because it's back to financial resilience. I like, I like to dabble. In the UK, we have these schemes that allow you to invest in startups that heavily tax incentivized. That is not the bedrock of my plan for financial well-being and financial security. I do that for a bit of fun, and if it pays off, I feel great. And if it goes to zero, hey, that was the price of play.
Excellent. So know when you're going into the casino versus actually planning for the future. Really quick, just 1 minute on this question. How do you feel about investing in vacation rental property in lower price markets as a way to start into real estate when home prices in the large city where I live is untenable because of the down payment? Is it wise to bank on this as a way to build equity and create short-term income? Anything to watch out for?
You see, so that is a very specific question and all the rest. Because all the stuff I've given you is super macro, top down. What I would tell you is that many people in the UK, their plan for retirement is their property, and it goes badly wrong. My sister, she used to work for a company in Houston. So I used to work for a company in Fort Worth near Dallas, then got moved to Houston. Twice she's been caught in negative equity. Like, you've got to figure out your gearing ratios, your debt, what's your financial resilience. In the UK in 2008 and 2009, the decade before, everyone got wealthy doing property. You went down the pub and everyone like, Beri, hey man, I've got all of this stuff. I've got all these mortgages. They just got cleared out. It's not to say property is a bad thing, but it's about gearing. It's about financial resilience. And you'd be amazed at all these people who on paper, they've got, hey, I've got a property here and a property there. I own all of these flats in Miami. Man, those things. By the way, people in Dubai, Google Dubai property prices where you're left, like 30, 40, 50% haircut down on property where people did that. So I'm not trying to scare people. I just think you've got to do proper financial planning. And if you know what you're doing, like everything in life, I'm sure there are opportunities to make money. I just think too often people dive in thinking they'll make a quick buck, and it can go horribly wrong really quickly.
Excellently said. Thank you, Rob. Final question for you. You've been incredibly generous with your time and insights today. Some really life-changing lessons if we just heed them. So really appreciate that. What are the ways in which we can support you, your endeavors, what you're most passionate about? And if you have a final word of wisdom to wrap this up, that would be great.
No. So one thing I want, a separate thing is that when you invest your money, you can actually use that money to be a force for good. So you can actually use your rights to make companies make a bigger impact on the planet, do sustainable and responsible things. So actually, I want you to walk away knowing that not only are you taking care of your future financial self and of your family, but actually, if we all do that, we can have a really positive impact on the planet. I think the fact that you're on the call, you kind of get it, but invest in yourself. And I don't mean actually the money side. I mean, educate yourself, read books, listen to podcasts, do stuff like this, and actually talk to your colleagues about it. The thing that makes my day is when I get an Instagram message from a girl that watched my TEDx talk 3 years ago. And she said, hey, Rob, I just wanted you to know I'm now putting 150 quid in my pension. That's a game changer, right? When people read my children's book, Save Your Acorns, and they say, I've opened up a pension for my son or my daughter, or I've opened, open up a 589K. If you've got a niece or a nephew and every year you're going to the Disney store and buying stuff, don't buy him Disney. Buy him a Disney stock, or even better, open him up 589K.
Excellent, Rob. This is excellent. I really, really appreciate everything that you shared with us. I definitely learned a ton myself. So my key takeaways for me is I'm going to actually carve out 2 hours in my calendar and just like actually make a baseline, minimum viable plan, and then read The Richest Man in Babylon, and then do something so that my bank account 30% just goes towards the things that it should go to, and I only spend the 70%. So thank you so much, Rob. Really appreciate this and hope to see you again very soon.
Thanks, Beri. Have a great day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Take care. Take care, Rob. See you again soon.